it's fantastic to be kicking off this Web Summit for ISA. I'm really privileged and honoured to be on the first on the lineup, and it's great. So one of the reasons I'm really excited is that ISA and ourselves, who are, talk about the Architect Tomorrow initiative and so on later on, but I'm really excited because the two organisations align really nicely, and so I'm really pleased that we are working together. And the material I have here, the evolution of business as usual and architecture to support that evolution of business as usual, very much aligns with the wider talks I think you're going to hear later on in this Web Summit. And there's some really impressive speakers lined up later on, talking various topics that talk about the future of digital business and innovation and technology leadership. So look, what is my talk all about? My talk really, as I say, is all about the fact that the business as usual sort of phrase is now a very difficult thing to pin down, and it keeps moving and changing and shifting. And that was true before the current pandemic, with technology disruption, digital disruption, and new technologies and new approaches to business and how organizations operate. But the world has kind of seen a catalyzed, move towards adopting working from home, shifts to digital, shifts to e-commerce, shifts to other aspects of working remotely. And the other thing is that the pandemic has forced a lot of people to recognize and reconnect with the natural society, the natural world around them, that perhaps the modern society often lets us forget, but actually it's kind of been painfully brought back home to us that we are biological, living, breathing things, and we need to operate in the ecosystem, the natural ecosystem, and we need to think about sustainability, and we need to think about how we reboot post-pandemic in a sustainable sense, both in a business sustainability, financial sustainability sense, but also in a natural ecosystem sense. And so businesses will not, operate or be successful in the medium to longer term, without considering these things and how they operate and how they pivot and how they change. And architects are, of course, at the center of all this. Architects are often turned to provide answers and provide, solutions and designs and enterprise architectures that will help organizations respond to these challenging times, and how do they kind of reorganize themselves, re-establish themselves, and perhaps reinvent parts of themselves to be more relevant and to be more successful in the future, is very much sitting with the architects. And so Architect Tomorrow is very much about a community that we've been building to address that, to kind of bring architects globally together who've got different perspectives, either from different industries, different business perspectives, different technical disciplines, to come together and discuss many of these challenging themes. I'll talk a bit more about that later on. So in summary, my talk is going to explore this evolution of business as usual, the impact on architectural thinking, and also touch on how we at Tanium and how our Architect Tomorrow initiative helps support this new world we're in. And so now I'm going to play a short little intro video, hopefully, if it works. And so, yeah, this is the Architect Tomorrow initiative logo. Anyway, before we get into that, let me talk a little bit about who I am. So who is Oliver, who's talking to you? So I've been an architect, and before that, a systems developer. I started off in computer science, so a classic computer science background, but have progressed through the ranks of developer and solutions architect, enterprise architect, and more recently a couple of chief architect roles. So currently I'm the chief IT architect for the European region at Tanium. Tanium are our unified endpoint management and endpoint security solution and platform that I will touch on briefly later on in the talk. Prior to Tanium, I was just getting on for a year ago now. Prior to that, for 3 years, I was the chief architect for the risk advisory part of Deloitte in the UK. And my role at Tanium is to provide executive engagement, provide architecture engagement, provide advice, do architecture evangelization, and also come up with our reference architecture and maintain our reference architecture, as well as running the Architect Tomorrow community. And as I say, my experience spans development, hands-on development roles, DevOps, but also a range of different industries across energy, government, telco, banking, financial services, and professional services. I'm also a BCS member, chartered professional, slightly certified in AWS, and you can find me hanging out on LinkedIn quite a bit. and here's my Twitter handle as well. Some of the pictures here on screen, the one that's an avatar. Recently, I was in a series, Tanium, the expert series, and in fact, the blog that inspired this talk, The Evolution of Business as Usual, is available. If you Google Evolution of Business as Usual, you'll find that blog with my avatar associated with it, which is why I put that on there. Anyway, so enough about me. Let's get into the meat of this discussion. So, the evolution of business as usual. Apologies, my computer's decided to do something a bit weird. 2 seconds, see if it sorts itself out if I go back and forward again. Yes, it does, good. So the evolution of business as usual then. So I'm sure you would have heard similar things to this, but I just wanted to kind of capture some anecdotes from some different perspectives. One of which is, the rapid increase in speed of adopting technology to respond to the situation we're in. Out of forced necessity to continue to operate, many organizations have adopted technology that perhaps would have previously taken them years in a space of weeks. I have seen firsthand myself this in our customers, and also, I've heard stories from my contacts about how rapidly people have moved to, remote working. People who thought perhaps they could never work remotely before are now working remotely and seeing the benefits of it. And so from a technology standpoint, it's been a rapid adoption of technology, which has come with challenges. And many have said, why couldn't we work like this before? Why didn't we realize we could work like this before? And there's been a big shift in sort of business culture, in management style, in how people are kind of trusted, how people work, how people operate, and people have had to get creative. How do we do our work remotely when we're not, face to face with each other? How do we continue to operate? And it's really sort of shaken up the business culture, and I think it will continue to do so in the medium term. And the last one's one I like. This is actually my neighbor that said to me, I don't miss my 2-hour each way commute, and I'm not going back to it. And by that she meant, even after things return to normal, whatever that looks like post what's going on right now, she doesn't want to do the 5-day-a-week, 2-hour each way commute. Perhaps she'll do it two days a week, 1 or 2 days a week, but she's certainly, pretty clear that she's demonstrated to her organization that she can operate successfully, she can be productive, she can do her job, and not go into the office every day. So this isn't going to be just a slight blip and everyone goes back to the office. Of course, people will return to the office. It's a good place for collaboration. It's a great place for kind of working together and bouncing ideas off each other. But it's certainly not going to be the only operating model. Like I think for many organizations it was. Everyone went into the office, and we'll touch on that a little bit more in a minute. So before we let's just see if my computer wants to behave. Yeah. Click, come on. Yeah, so before we go too deep into where we are now, I wanted to take a look back and hence the evolution of business as usual, because human society is pretty complicated, and if you do a bit of reading into anthropology, which I have done a little bit, it's quite fascinating to see kind of how we evolved as a society, as societies, and of course then how workplaces have evolved out of those societies. So of course things started in the tribal era, where everyone was very perhaps independent, small groups, but highly agile, able to get things done with a fair degree of freedom. And as things have moved on, we've moved to discovering farming, discovering that we could kind of keep our food and various other things close to us. We didn't have to go hunting for it. And then we of course moved into factories, and things were then kind of automated and productionized, through the use of the industrial sort of era, industrialization. So various, machines were deployed, advent of steam and various other things allowed us to do things that we couldn't do with just human hands. And so that kind of efficiency, increased, productivity increased. And then as we've moved into, the workforce has moved into offices, post sort of factories, into the sort of knowledge worker kind of world. We've taken a lot of those legacy approaches from the factory into the office. The kind of concept of going somewhere harks back to that. I mean, Dave Copland does some great talks, around business reimagined and the rise of the humans. And I like what he says about the fact that, if you look at a lot of our technology and a lot of our things, they still hark back to the industrial era, and they still hark back to the days when typewriters were manual. For example, if you look at your QWERTY keyboard, the reason it's laid out the way it is because it was designed so that the letters wouldn't clash when you typed. So, and also if you think about going into the office, that is very much a thing where it was a necessity when perhaps we only had a mainframe computer. and it's now, a thing which isn't always the right answer, as the decentralizing nature of the internet means that we can think differently about how we work, where we work, and how we get things done. And so you think about the kind of tools that have allowed us to kind of make that happen. Each of these sort of phases have happened because we've introduced technology at various different points. So we have discovered tools which allowed us to to go and hunt, and then we discovered farming, as I touched on earlier, which allowed us to free up time and allowed us to expand our knowledge because we freed up time from doing basic necessities like staying alive, looking for food and keeping warm. Buildings and farms allowed us to do a lot of that. And then, what then moved us on from that period was, clearly various discoveries, Iron Age and various other things, but industrialization, kind of being the next big one I've kind of highlighted. And then I suppose, the move into offices was early computing. I mean, before that, paper-based files, but you then have mainframes, which is perhaps the reason why people went into the office. And then we moved into the era of personal computer and local area networking, which still was pretty office-centric. And as I say, it's only really been the last 10 to 15 years or so with the internet really maturing and distributed kind of computing coming about, that things have really allowed this work from anywhere, this distributed workforce approach it can happen. These lines on this chart are very much oversimplified, right? If someone wants to challenge that these aren't quite right, I would completely agree. It's a general sort of view of, if you think about how productivity increased as we kind of went from farming and developing things in factories and offices, I think there's arguably then a dip when the office was no longer the best place to be. And in fact, open plan offices are arguably very distracting places for many people. They're not the most comfortable places to be to get work done. And so they're a great place to catch up with people. But for me, I can't do productive work. I can't do architecture really effectively in a busy open plan office. And so therefore, I would say the office isn't always the most productive place. It depends obviously on the role, but I would say in general, and again, I refer back to some of Dave Copland's pieces on this, where he talks about people being nervous, feeling like they're on the savannah. He compares people in the open plan office to animals on the savannah. It's a fantastic kind of narrative, and I'm probably doing a bad job of summarizing it, so I recommend you go and check that out. But it's really interesting, the kind of whole human kind of psychology piece around the open plan office and what that's done to people's kind of productivity and well-being. And then the agility is the other thing to kind of think about is, as hunter-gatherers, we were incredibly agile. We could do what we wanted. We could react very fast to perhaps the change in where food was. As we moved into sort of farming, we started to become shackled to locations. We started to have roots. We started to become less agile, and factories even more so, because factories took time to retool, to create something else in a factory required quite a lot of work to retool the factory. And the same with offices. If you want to reconfigure an office, that's quite a lot of work. And then if you think about the future with distributed workforce, there's the potential for far more agility, because smaller teams can perhaps go and work where it makes sense for them to go and work, go and use managed service offices, collaboration spaces. And the other thing I wanted to highlight at the end here is the fact that perhaps we'll see a return to tribes and communities, with the fact that people are now perhaps being more local, not traveling into cities as much, perhaps having more of a community feel. Will there be more of a return to that kind of community ethos? I guess it remains to be seen. But these are some of the trends and some of the kind of technologies that we've kind of seen over the last tens of thousands of years, going back from farming and to where we are today. And perhaps it's an overreaction to the current sort of situation to say this is a massive shift, but I think certainly it's the start of a change in how we work, I would say, particularly for knowledge workers. And so, yeah, a couple of other points on here I've skipped over, of course, is the move to sort of smartphones, tablets, and laptops, ultra portable computing. The rise of open source as well has really shown how people can work online in a distributed manner, across the internet, how they can collaborate using, those sorts of collaboration tools. It's really kind of opened people's eyes to how you can work at scale in a distributed manner. And so kind of the last icon is almost kind of a bit of a bit jokey, really, in the fact that we have this concept of will we start to augment ourselves with technology? Clearly things like Google Glass have disappeared for now because society rejected it quite harshly. But I think it's only a matter of time before we start to see more perhaps more augmented capabilities. Now, Whether that's like this Android picture on the slide, probably not. It's probably going to be more like when you're working, the computer anticipates what you need given the task that you're operating on, and things like machine learning and so on, rather than, you know, perhaps it's all walking around like androids. But who knows where the future holds? And there's some really interesting, you know, discussions and, you know, cross between science fiction but also scientific papers talking about, you know, human augmentation and perhaps where will things lead in the future. And so coming on to the next kind of phase really is, you know, where are we now? You know, we're currently in this kind of interesting crossroads, I think, where we have a number of disruptive trends. We've got, you know, industry disruption and business change happening as a result of people really finally kind of understanding, I think in many cases, what the internet allows them to do, what the digital business really allows them to do. And so the other thing I would say is this decentralized computing is complemented by decentralized organizations, so DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. A relatively new thing, but I think it shows the potential of a truly distributed virtual organization. I mean, there are many virtual organizations now with, you know, limited physical offices. And so it's going to be interesting to see how, you know, organizations change and pivot to this world of the distributed workforce. And I think you can create some interesting parallels between decentralized computing technologies and decentralized kind of operating structures and working structures. And so there's going to be some interesting changes, I think, on the horizon, where people start to really realize what the art of the possible is with their organization with this technology. Of course, the other thing that's really you know, making waves is the intelligent edge. I think it's, as a computer scientist, it's been quite fascinating to see, you know, the centralization versus decentralization, where, you know, of course, everyone compares, you know, the cloud, adopting the cloud, to mainframe era, where, you know, the mainframe was where all the computing power was, and now the cloud is where all the computing power is. But moving forward into the future, the cloud isn't going to be the right place for everything. And if you look at autonomous vehicles and you look at cybersecurity and various other things, actually you need the data and processing to be at the edge rather than in the cloud in many cases. The other thing is, you know, with the 5G and better Wi-Fi and other connectivity, ultra fast, you know, ubiquitous, reliable connectivity is no longer a dream. It's actually becoming a reality, which will unlock a whole bunch of new industrial Internet of Things and operational technology type use cases. Perhaps, you know, interactive and dynamic retail, which might lure people back into retail spaces from online. And you know, things such as enchanted environments and adaptive workspaces that can, you know, perhaps move around or reorganize depending on the needs of the day. So I think the offices of the future will certainly be more dynamic, not just in terms of how people use them, but I think in terms of how they're perhaps reconfigured. So today you have a touchscreen perhaps to book in, book out a meeting room. Perhaps in the future, the touchscreen will allow you to rearrange that room, perhaps subdivide it, or, you know, create collaboration spaces or whatever it is, perhaps do a workshop layout by, you know, by clicking a button, and the adaptive environment might then adjust the surroundings for you. And of course, another big one, and this isn't an exhaustive list by any means, this was just a few examples, is automation and machine learning. And this ties in with some of the big complex challenges I'm going to come on to in a minute. You know, of course, automation and machine learning and artificial intelligence bring fantastic increases in productivity. They can do some things amazingly well. There are clearly a lot of gaps in what they can't do. You know, they're not the answer to everything, but they are clearly, again, also making people realize what's possible with, you know, advanced statistical models and clever programming. And, yeah, and I think this is the one leg of these structural challenges that as architects we really need to face into. The other side is, of course, these big complex global problems, and many of these I think we have for too long been kind of kicking that can down the road of how do we deal with these things. And I think as architects it's time to start kind of looking at these things. Even if we can't solve them, we can at least start to make business leaders that we work with and our stakeholders aware of the trade-offs. You know, as architects, I think we're great at showing options, you know, doing an options analysis, you know, coming up with different approaches, different solutions, different ways of solving problems. And I think it's time we started using some of that thinking on some of these big global challenges as well around, you know, I think this is everything from climate change and sustainability. You know, there's some really quite eye-opening stats about how much the IT industry, you know, contributes in terms of, you know, energy usage and emissions. And it's something like if it was a country, it would be like the third biggest country in the world in terms of energy consumption. So it's time we started taking this seriously, really, and started thinking about not just the quickest, fastest way to get things done, but also factoring in the other consequences of our solutions and of our architectures. The other thing about some of the technologies I talked about on the left is it's potentially going to drive further inequality, unfortunately. You know, the digital divide is only going to get worse before it gets better, as not everyone perhaps has access to connectivity. Not everyone understands you know, how to do automation, how to build machine learning models. Yet many roles and many jobs will perhaps be reduced or replaced by these technologies. And so the ethical kind of considerations, you know, in some of these machine learning models, perhaps whether someone can have a product or not, perhaps whether someone gets cheap insurance or more expensive insurance, or whether someone has a job moving forwards, you know, is a key concern that needs to be factored in with many of our, you know, architectures. And this ties in with unemployment as well. You know, not only unemployment due to financial downturn, but many organizations are going to be looking at technology to make their, you know, recovery. And how do we ensure that we, you know, we continue to, you know, ensure people are able to get a job, that we retrain those people. Some of these things are clearly more for the government side of things as well, but we all need to kind of think about the implications, I think, of some of our architectural choices. And of course, last but not least, and again, these aren't exhaustive, there are many sustainable development goals that need to be considered, but another big one is cyber and physical security. You know, as things become more uncertain, and as you know, cybercrime continues to become continues to be a problem, I should say, sorry, for many organizations. How do we also bake that thinking in? You know, these big structural problems are challenging. And I think as architects, you know, we shouldn't think we have to solve all these things on our own. And hence, what we've done over the past couple of years is create this community, Architect Tomorrow. With the pandemic, we have switched it more into a virtual group. But the premise is still the same. How do we bring smart people together? How do we bring bright minds across the architecture profession together to discuss and solve some of these things collectively? Because I'm really excited by when you bring diverse, you know, opinions and diverse experiences together, you really get some fantastic, you know, ideas and problem solving coming out of that. And the other thing I would say is that the world is changing, you know, rapidly, as I've just sort of touched on. The pace of change isn't slowing down. Another great person that I like, who puts this really nicely, is a chap called Eddie Obeng, who says that we're living in the world after midnight. And by that he means that midnight was the last time when we could perhaps keep on top of everything that's going on around us. You know, back when we were farmers and hunter-gatherers and life was far simpler, we could kind of keep on top of what was going on around us. Now the world is so global, so complex, so technologically advanced, and there is so much happening across the world. It's just not possible for us all to keep on top of it individually. We've got to work collectively. We've got to pool our, you know, collective kind of experiences and knowledge together. You know, I learn so much from my peers, and I think genuinely there are exciting kind of light bulb moments every time we kind of get together. And so that's kind of the, you know, some of the rationale behind Architect Tomorrow. We move on. And of course, I've already talked about this. I've already touched on this, but here's a kind of quote I came up with a few weeks ago, which essentially says, for knowledge workers, that the cloud, you know, has shown that technology doesn't need to be in the office. And you know, and as tragic as this pandemic has been, I'm not going to trivialize it in any means at all. The situation has made knowledge workers and their managers realize they don't necessarily need to be in the office either. And I appreciate this applies more to knowledge workers, not every role, you know, that this applies to, but it has made people, as I say, really rethink and think about how they operate. And I come back to this distributed tech point, really. You know, if you think about large organizations perhaps have been struggling to be dynamic enough, to be agile enough. And if you think about distributed technology being a way of, you know, scaling up and scaling down, being more agile, being more elastic, you know, using cloud computing to respond to demands, to peaks in demand, I see distributed working as being offering a similar opportunity for how we work. And if we're more dynamic and more agile in how we work and where we work from and how we operate, then I think, you know, larger organizations can start to become more, you know, more reactive, you know, through things like self-organization, through, you know, various other moves to move processes to more lean, you know, agile, dynamic sort of approaches, rather than long kind of complex processes. Of course, you know, I'm massively simplifying here, but, you know, I think there's definitely something in that. As I touched on earlier, the situation has created gaps and will continue to create gaps. And I think it's worth talking about some of the other pieces here as well, that as people have rapidly moved to distributed workforce, to people working from home, the castle and moat model that perhaps many organizations were still relying on, and by that I mean the office is the castle, you have strong fortress walls around it, you have a moat, which is your firewall and your various kind of physical security, perhaps swipe badge entry and all those things. That model of protecting your organization has kind of come down overnight, really, with distributed working and working from home. And so that's created a bunch of gaps. People have had to move very quickly, in order to react to how to work from home. And of course, there's had to be trade-offs. And I think the thing is here, the foundation to being a digital business, in my mind, is knowing what you have, both in terms of your people, but also in terms of your technology assets, and what are their risks and weaknesses. And so that's very much what Tanium is all about. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we help our customers with that. But essentially, this all boils down really to having the right collaboration in place, the right data in place, and sort of trusted platforms really to kind of work from. Too long, I think we've worked in silos in technology, because perhaps we don't like people. We like technology, but we don't always like people. I'm massively generalizing, but I also perhaps talking a little bit about myself at times. But I go back to this kind of phrase that is a bit of a cliche, but it's true. You can't manage what you can't measure. And this applies to technology as much as it applies to anything else. If you don't know what you've got, you don't know where it is, then you're in trouble. And you can't secure what you can't see. So you can't really be secure if you don't actually know what you've got. And unfortunately, many organizations just don't actually know what they have, because they don't have effective processes for knowing. IT is often the cobbler with broken shoes. It's kind of a bit of an irony, really, that the IT department doesn't have good technology to manage its own technology in many cases, because it's just not been a priority. But I think this shift to distributed working has made many organizations realize, no, we need to make sure we're on top of what technology is where and what risks it has, and what things we need to do in order to kind of improve the situation. And in fact, on this topic, we're running a virtual relay as part of Architect Tomorrow on the 22nd of September. So look out for that, and feel free to get in touch with me if that's of interest. And I'll talk a bit more about what a virtual relay is in a second. So a little bit more about Tanium, who we are. So as I said, we're a unified endpoint management and a unified endpoint security platform. And we really truly believe in this unification, as you can see from our approach. We really want to offer a holistic approach to securing and managing technology. And I believe that's the foundation to any digital business, as I say, is to really have a good, stable platform for execution, which is a secure platform for execution, and one where you know what you have. And so UEM, just quickly, allows you to kind of essentially inventory what assets you have, but do that in real time, not rely on an old outdated database, do it dynamically using a really clever protocol and really clever distributed technology approach. And it lets you manage what software you have, manage patching, manage performance, and so on and so forth. And then on the security side, how do you respond very quickly, perhaps when you have a malware or a breach or some data issue? How do you then very quickly find out what machines that affects and go and fix that, and go and remediate issues at scale? So I'm talking here about perhaps organizations with tens, if not hundreds of thousands, and in fact, we have customers with millions of endpoints under management with Tanium. So how do you do that at scale is often the challenge. How do you do that at scale, and then when you don't actually know where your computing is? You don't know if folks have taken their laptop home, or it's still in the office, or it's in the coffee shop. How do you manage that problem? And many solutions just don't work. And so we've fundamentally re-architected how you do systems management in order to solve those problems. And then this is a reference architecture, so I'm not going to dwell on this. This is something that I'll be publishing from time to time on Architect Tomorrow, but it's not just about Tanium, but clearly cybersecurity and IT operations is a key theme, as I say, is a foundational theme. And so this is where we see sort of our thing fitting alongside other platforms and different types of endpoint. But as I say, I won't dwell on this because this talk isn't really about Tanium, but I wanted to give you a little bit of background on who Tanium are and why architecture is so important to Tanium, because clearly to get this right, when we work well with our customers, they need to sort of understand that we're a platform and we talk to other platforms, and we really align nicely with architecture principles such as kind of consolidation and keeping things simple. And so Architect Tomorrow. So I would love folks to get involved with Architect Tomorrow. And as I say, I'm really excited that ISA and Architect Tomorrow are working more and more together, which is brilliant. And so Architect Tomorrow is that community that I touched on that brings together different types of architects across the enterprise, business, technology spectrum, bring those people together, allows an opportunity to share that breadth of knowledge and solve collective challenges. But it's also a platform for architects. There's a way to perhaps grow your own network, amplify your impact on organizations. Ironically, I found often some of the best ways to have an impact internally is actually to be quite active externally with thinking. And we have a number of things that we do. So we have something we call The Architect, where we do an interview with a prominent architect, with chief architects and CTOs and so on. We do short video interviews with those. We have something called Unboxing, where we'll unbox an architecture. We're going to unbox the Tanium architecture shortly, but we'll also unbox perhaps things like AWS and Google Cloud and various other platforms. We'll unbox those. It's a bit of a joke, bit of a parody on the unboxing YouTube video. So it's a bit of fun as well as an opportunity to learn something new about an architecture. So more on our technical track. Community talks, I love these because people come to me and say, Oliver, can we do a discussion on smart cities and Internet of Things and operational technology and 5G? And that's exactly what we did a couple of weeks ago. We ran one on that very topic. We've done them on the response to the pandemic, how you should be helping your organizations think medium to longer term in these times when everyone is obviously knee-jerk reacting to everything. How do you help your organizations think about the pivots they need to make to being more of a digital business? So we've done some great talks there. All that content, by the way, is on our YouTube channel. And then virtual relays is something I'm really excited about, because we've really experimented here with how you do workshops and brainstorming and mind mapping and so on online. So we've taken a format that works quite well in person, but we've actually made it work online by having essentially a shared mind map, and we break a group into smaller groups and they rotate around different topics and they build on a mind map. And in fact, on the next slide, I've got an example of some of the output of that. In the middle here is this, these online workshops we do where essentially we start with a theme and then people will shout out or put in the chat different things, and we will start to connect up ideas and start to really brainstorm and connect and think about how we can approach something in a different way. And then actually the screenshots on the left are some of those videos I was talking about, some of those community talks we've done. And then the right hand side is the LinkedIn group where we post some of our thinking about architecture, say in a very vendor agnostic way, thinking about the industry at large. And so Architect Tomorrow. So now I've got another short little video which just talks about the fact that to join the community, we're on LinkedIn and we're on YouTube. So where do you find us? You definitely find us on YouTube. The channel is called Architect Tomorrow. We've got a number of blogs, and I'll be doing more on various different topics. We've got lots of great content coming up, interviews with prominent architects, like I say, chief architects at places like Capgemini and large kind of brand names, as well as small organizations as well. Independent consultants, many independent consultants are involved in the group as well, and that's been great. It's great to kind of work with a real diverse range of folks from large organizations and as well as startups and smaller organizations. We're active on LinkedIn. We're using the hashtag Architect Tomorrow, but we've also got a LinkedIn group as well. And so and so that's kind of largely what I was going to talk about, but I'm conscious I've kind of run ahead of time, but perhaps we've got a few questions. Michael, how are we doing on the questions front? Have we got questions?
Yes, we got a few questions here, Oliver.
Great.
So we can get started on those.
Yeah, let's do that.
This one here was earlier in the program.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, and it says, how do you think the massive and rapid influx of automation into areas of life will affect this, especially when replacing white-collar jobs like actuaries, lawyers, accountants, and even programmers?
Yeah, what's interesting, I was doing some thinking about, let's go back to that slide actually. I was doing some thinking about programming even, because there's been various moves with low code and no code even, so there's perhaps a fear that eventually the machine will be better at coding the machine than humans. I don't know. I have to say I prefer the term intelligence augmentation as opposed to artificial intelligence. I think artificial intelligence makes it sound like it can do more than it really can. I think really, in most cases, it's intelligence augmentation because it's helping people do their jobs more effectively. And yes, it maybe do some of the heavy lifting, like in the blue collar space, certainly with factories and production lines. Of course, robots and automation for many years have been perhaps reducing jobs there. But often what happens is it's a bit like if you look at the advent of automobiles or cars, when horses went off the roads, the horse cart drivers became taxi drivers. And in many cases what happens is people just shift to a different profession. What my point here, I suppose, about the unemployment piece is we need to get better at sort of at thinking more adaptively about our careers and helping people to be more adaptive with their careers as well. And I think that's the burden of that. Perhaps a lot of people think should sit with government. I think there is a joint role there, that perhaps when we're displacing people, we almost kind of architect in as part of the business architecture and perhaps the process. How do we, perhaps not just make those people redundant, but we actually reskill them and redeploy them in another part of the organization or another part of the operation, because those people actually are probably very useful somewhere else. They've got good understanding of the organization. They know how things work. They perhaps know our customers really well. How do we move those into another role where they can actually perhaps check the process, or the system kind of helps them do more? So it's a tricky one, because it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Where yes, you can just on the face of it just say, yeah, technology is just taking away jobs. But I think that's a simplistic view. I think it creates other jobs. The challenge is, unless you tackle that kind of digital divide, not all those other jobs that are created are necessarily available and open to the people that are perhaps being displaced. So I think it's, but like I say, in summary, I think intelligent augmentation is a better way to go, because I think it provides better outcomes than just perhaps trying to automate everything, because I generally don't think the technology is good enough. I mean, there's a great example of this with the pandemic, where actually a lot of the machine learning models started to go wrong overnight. As soon as people started to behave massively differently as a result of the pandemic, supermarket systems that were relying on machine learning models to tell them what to put in their stores were just getting it completely wrong, because people didn't want the products that they would normally want. They wanted perhaps more basic products. And so this has caught many supply chains and many retail organizations off guard, because some of their, it's not even machine learning models, some of their normal analytical models just haven't got this right. So I think it's not fair to say, that these technologies are just a panacea and they will, just solve all these problems. I think you still need humans very much kind of working with the technology for the best outcome.
Okay, next question is asked. What role should architects play in promoting dynamism and elasticity in their enterprise?
That's a great one. Yeah, no, I think it's interesting, because I think for many years, architects have been helping their organizations understand cloud and understand the elasticity of cloud compute and how that can kind of help with peaks in demand like Black Friday and so on. I guess what I was touching on earlier is, I think actually, if you have a distributed workforce and not everyone is coming into the office, then you have, and perhaps if you start exploring things like crowdsourcing and other models of employment and other models of getting things done, then perhaps you have a more elastic organization in other senses as well. So not just, it shouldn't just be applied to the computing model. It should also be applied to our operating model. Perhaps we leverage a supplier ecosystem more to get things done. I think you can point to cloud and say, look, this is how the internet, essentially works to, service computing demand. Well, actually, there are services like crowdsourcing and other mechanisms that allow you to kind of have more burst when it comes to other types of work as well. And the internet allows for that to be possible. Perhaps follow the sun type approaches, where you want to support working across multiple time zones. Well, you can either do that by setting up establishments across the world yourself, or you can look to leverage perhaps a crowdsourced provider or a range of ecosystem options. So yeah, no, I think it's on the architect absolutely to think about how you become a more dynamic, elastic organization, because that makes you more resilient as well. I think it's not just all about perhaps cost reduction or agility. It's also about resilience. Look at what we've all been through recently. There's been a massive wake up in terms of how resilient are our organizations.
Okay. Can you suggest for any easy rule engine which business users, without developer involvement, can manage their tasks to make work easy or automate few tasks.
Sorry, say that one again.
Okay, yep. And so I'm just reading directly here from a user.
Yep.
Can you suggest for an easy rule engine which business users, without developer involvement, can manage their tasks to make work easier or to automate a few tasks?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there are a lot of technologies that have come on the market recently, particularly the cloud-based ones. I mean, if you look at something like everything from kind of Google Forms on a really basic level through to more sophisticated things, perhaps like Aptio, sorry, it's God, there's escapes me at the moment. But there is essentially a drag and drop integration tool online that allows you to kind of integrate different online systems. So it lets you take the API feeds from perhaps Salesforce and feed it into Google Sheet or so on and so forth. So it really annoys me that I can't think of the name of it. It's not AppSync. It's no, Zapier. Sorry, Zapier. So there are tools like Zapier. There are a number of other low-code solutions. I would say the danger with these things, though, is that they on the surface they can look good. The danger with them can be that without kind of architectural involvement and guidelines on how you use them, I think they can become a bit of a mess quite quickly. For smaller use cases, for modest sort of use cases, I think they're fine. But the problem with them is when you layer things on top of each other, they can create a bit of chaos and a bit of a mess. So I think it's very much classic architect answer. It depends. Yes, there are a number of business rules technologies, business process management technologies, automation technologies, and also software process automation as well, right? Which lets you replace people clicking and copying and pasting and things like that. They all have their place. I would say be very careful about seeing them as a kind of a silver bullet to solve all problems. I think you need an architect to kind of help guide you through the different components of your solution and create really sensible guide rails and principles for when you use those different technologies and for what.
Okay, and we have a few more questions here for you. I think somebody really wants to know again, how can they join Architect Tomorrow team?
Yeah, sure. So Architect Tomorrow, as I say, is you can subscribe to the YouTube channel and then comment on a video and say that you'd like to get involved, or you can come and find the LinkedIn group or reach out to me and reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn and ask to get involved. It's been great, actually. We've had a number of people approach me across the world, and it's been great. And we really welcome a diverse set of views, either on different topic suggestions or on people wanting to get involved in the topics that we're talking about. Because, like I say, the best conversations happen when we have that diversity of thought and opinion.
Mm-hmm. And again, could you recap some of the books that you recommend on the subject?
Yeah, so to be honest, on this wider evolution of business as usual, I've actually ventured away from some of the traditional technology books because I wanted to kind of learn more about psychology. I think you get to a point in your career as an architect when you start to realize that yes, technology is important, but as much as important is people. And so I've been doing a lot of reading, like things like Homo Deus, which is looking at the future of perhaps the humanity, and also Here Be Dragons. So Here Be Dragons is by I think it's an Oxford professor. He kind of talks about the various different types of future technology, be it biotech, be it nanotech, be it augmented humans, and perhaps the challenges and the risks, and looking at things like climate change as well. So kind of looking at human caused impacts as well as sort of natural disasters and things. So but I think on the sort of technology books sort of side of things, and the enterprise architecture side of things, the enterprise architecture strategy is a fantastic book that I really like, because it really kind of talks about enterprise architecture being that strategic kind of business approach to rethinking your organization, rethinking your operating model, and yeah, no, so I highly recommend that from an architecture standpoint. But I also recommend kind of branching out from the technology domain and looking at anthropology and human behavior as much as technology, because I think as architects we straddle that divide between the business and people concerns as well as technology. So yeah, that would be my advice: is balance your reading material.
Okay. Next question asks, do you think machine learning will play a major role in endpoint security as we're adopting more IoT?
I think without a doubt it has its place. I think that the challenge is a lot of people place too much emphasis on it. I think it can have its place. I think in the future we will see more of it, but I think you need a good foundation of data as a starting point. I think just suggesting that you can apply machine learning and AI to something without good data, without a good baseline actually of what your organization looks like technologically, it isn't good. I mean, it's in danger of being overhyped as the answer, when actually there's some basic stuff that you need to do, sort of to close the windows and doors, as it were, of your house to make sure that you're secure before perhaps going for the advanced, very whizzy sounding technologies, which are great, but you need to have the basics in place. You need to have a good understanding of what you've got, have good data, real-time data, near real-time data on your computing assets, their security status, before you start venturing into, kind of more advanced sort of technologies such as machine learning, I would say.
Okay, let's see. How do you see technology models changing? What niche remote working sectors will take off?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I think it's difficult. It's always dangerous to stare into a crystal ball, make predictions, isn't it? But I think it's fairly safe to say that the technology profession, I think, will become more distributed and even more remote than it has already. I think many have been already proving for a while that you can do, software development and other things remotely very, very effectively. But I go back to what I was talking about earlier around crowdsourcing. I think crowdsourcing definitely has a lot of potential. It's something that many organizations perhaps are overlooking, is this ability to kind of just almost outsource via the internet for various skills and various jobs and tasks to be done. I really think that will become more prevalent. But no, look, I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see quite what comes out of this as people realize quite how much can change and how you can, your operating models can be different. I mean, I think what's really interesting as well for me is retail. What's going to happen there? And that's the one sector that's been hit hard by this, like hospitality and retail, and will continue to need to rethink. And what's been really interesting is looking at China and what they've done. And I really like the idea that some of the ideas they've come up with around taking your retail staff and making them into sort of evangelists for your brand online. So making them into people that talk about your products online and have a dialogue with your customers digitally, as well as when people come into store. And I very much think these blended sort of digital and physical approaches to working, particularly in the retail space, is definitely the future.
Okay, what is the role of an enterprise architect in migration to cloud?
How long have you got? So yeah, just briefly, I think the role of the enterprise architect in the migration to cloud is to make sure that people are doing it for the right reasons, that they're balancing the business drivers as well as thinking about the technology. Because I think there's a danger that you just look at cloud and go, yeah, that's the answer. And in many cases, don't get me wrong, it is. But I think you need to look at what are your business drivers for moving to cloud, and look at the financial model as well. Many organizations either have a cash flow preference for OPEX or CAPEX, capital expenditure over operating expenditure, and sometimes that doesn't work. So you'd be surprised actually the number of initiatives I've been involved in that actually have been stopped because someone's gone, but we like the fact that we can invest and write off our technology investment. We don't want to go to an OPEX model. We want to keep our OPEX as low as possible. So we'd rather make an investment in something. And of course, it's not always cheaper and it's not always better to go for cloud. So I think the enterprise architect role, there's many things to do as an EA with the cloud migration, but it's very much to act as that kind of bigger picture thinker, to think about, again, the guide rails, the principles. When would we go with cloud? When would we choose perhaps an edge approach, thinking to the future? When would we go, with actually a co-located data center? Perhaps not running your own data center. I think running your own data center probably will be a thing of the past fairly soon, but co-located data centers where you've got your own kit, certainly I think will continue to prevail, because for some workloads, they're more cost effective and more efficient than running things on cloud.
And yes, and someone's asking, could you please type the name of the book you referenced about people behavior? Could you type that for them in the question pane?
Yeah, well, it's a series actually. I mean, I meant to actually grab it because I was going to refer to it in my talk. What I can do is I can follow up when this gets posted up online. In fact, I'll put something on the LinkedIn group with some of the recommended reading. But it's Homogeneous is the second book in the series, and the first one is about the history of humanity. but the name of it escapes me, which is really bad because I recommend it all the time. I've had real memory problems today. Apologies, but I will do a short post in the LinkedIn group and from my LinkedIn with those books that I recommend in the near future.
Okay, thank you. So if you have any other questions for Oliver, please come now. We have a few more minutes, so if you have a question for Oliver, please type it now in the question pane.
Equally, if you've got topics that you would like to see covered that you think really need a broader perspective on, is there a technology or business topic that you think Architect Tomorrow should tackle? Very interested in anyone with thoughts on that as well.
Roger that. And please remind everyone the name of your LinkedIn group.
So it's Architect Tomorrow. So if you search for Architect Tomorrow on LinkedIn, you should find that as a group.
Okay. Okay. So it says, thank you for your insights. In addition to sustainability, how can architects articulate the importance of enterprise resilience on a more holistic way? Not only IT reliability, but I appreciate your thoughts on enterprise resilience.
Yeah, I mean that's a big one, and I think there's been no better wake-up call. Again, I don't want to trivialize the pandemic; it's a serious thing, and I've obviously had folks that I know who've been affected by it. But what it has done is brought into sharp focus non-functional considerations. As architects, we're often the guardians of the non-functional requirements, NFRs, and I think this should be used by many to say we need to think about operational resilience. And of course, that can be a number of different things. That can be a physical thing, that can be having a standby office location or operating procedure, perhaps having a manual backup approach if technology goes down. But no, I think it's a really important topic. When I was at Deloitte, there was lots of discussion on this one, on even things like, should you have a secure enclave, perhaps an offline copy of all your data center data, kept somewhere. But also I come back to the point about knowing what you've got is the foundation to operational resilience. If you don't know what you have, who's using it, what applications are on it, you've got no hope really of understanding what you have and what you need to stand up as like a backup, or what status your backups are in, or your high availability or disaster recovery systems look like if you don't know what status they're in and how well they're operating. So I think so I think it's an important topic. I think you can use recent events and the coming kind of climate crisis, really, the ongoing climate crisis, to kind of highlight the fact that folks are going to need to start to think about adaptability and resilience as important non-functionals in their thinking on architecture and solutions going forward.
Okay, let's see. We got a couple more questions. Let's see here. What do we have? Again, if anybody has any questions, we have probably about 2 more minutes for Oliver before we'll take a short break. Here's a good one. Remote work. How about employee trust with multiple employers?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting one. And of course, there are some technology solutions there, but it starts to get a bit Big Brother, in all honesty. And I think it's got to be a balance of building trust through having a good dialogue with your manager and all those sort of sensible things. But of course, it's harder remotely. You can't perhaps judge emotion and sentiment in messages. I think a big thing there is over-reliance on instant messaging and text-based communication is dangerous because it's very easy to misunderstand. So I think that to trust, you need to have good, effective two-way communication between teams and and managers and peers. And so I think you need to think about what the most effective way is to communicate in order to build that trust. But certainly it's a barrier. And I think for many years, managers haven't wanted to manage anyone other than the sort of what I would call bums on seats approach, what we say in the UK, where you just effectively have people sat in front of you and you can see what they're doing. But it's a very old school, very old approach to management. And I think this is very much highlighting that in today's world, there are other ways of managing output. I think the other thing is it starts to make people sort of question, output. Is it about hours or is it about output? Is it about getting things done and having sort of KPIs and other measures of success rather than just clocking in and clocking out? So I think there are a number of things to unpack there, and it could be a whole discussion on its own. But clearly, again, it's a blend of, I think, the kind of traditional people management type things, some good hygiene there, as well as perhaps deploying technology to, again, perhaps have visibility of what employees are doing if you suspect that there are there are issues with productivity. But I think it needs to be treated with respect. I think you should only really use those sorts of technologies if you've got a genuine concern. I think just generally using those sorts of technologies en masse, without having good cause for doing so, I think potentially can erode trust with your employees. So it's a delicate balance to strike.
All right. Well, look, we'll get to one more question. And again, Oliver will be available via our Web Summit community, his LinkedIn group. He's very active on YouTube. So there will be many ways to contact Oliver for follow-up questions. And so we'll get to this very last question, Oliver. Which organization model has been more successful in your view, centralized EA or decentralized EA within the business units?
Oh, wow. Well, this could be a whole talk on its own. So I have seen both. And I think there are pros and cons to both. But I guess quickly, I think the centralized model has a higher risk of being, the classic ivory tower that comes up with great ideas, but they aren't grounded in reality. And of course, the danger with the federated approach, where you have it kind of distributed, is you can have a lack of coordination. The best model I've seen work well was when I worked in an organization where we had a core team and we all mostly sat together, but we were all aligned very much to specific business units and areas of the business. And so that allowed us to get very close to what was going on in that business area, really understand the pain points, the challenges, and design effective domain architectures and solution architectures for that area of the business. But at the same time, we would work very closely together as a team still, which allowed us to have that central repository of standards, of guidelines, of principles. But I think it's one that's really difficult to strike a balance on. And I think it really depends on your size of organization, the nature of the organization you're in. Are you highly regulated? There's a number, I think, of things you need to kind of put into that kind of decisioning in order to decide whether it makes sense to have central versus federated. But as I say, I think some blend is the best approach. So not going too central and being close to what's going on in the business units would be where I've seen the best success for architecture.